Hello and welcome back to the 3 or 4 of you who are still watching this video about covering Story 2 by clipping. This is part 2 where I'm going to make a couple of quick corrections to pattern 8 in that first project, and then I'm going to add the drums. And as I'm adding the drums, I'm going to be referring back to the cover that I made before, just because I did another take where I was trying to redo the drums just by listening to the song, and it ended up being really difficult to follow the video because I kept making mistakes, and it's just difficult to reason through this and do trial and error while also narrating. So hopefully you'll forgive me for taking a bit of a shortcut here. Let's first make the correction to pattern 8 here. So one of the issues is that on the chords track, this little blip sound doesn't actually happen on the 8th pattern. So I'm removing that trigger, and then I'm switching to the master track, which is what I used to control and define how long this track is. Right now, it repeats 8 times because it has a step length of 8, a step count of 8. That tab, and I believe what I did before, only repeats 6 times. So I'm going to change this to a step count of 12 instead. So those are the only edits I'm going to make, and now we can go ahead and get on with the drums. Let's start on pattern 2. This is in 3/8, and this is where the kick drum comes in, and it comes in just by itself. So I'm going to switch to the kick track, and I'm going to change the step count to 6. I'm going to load up the Z Kicks engine, and I will be using this kick sound, at least for my cover. You can use whatever kick sound you would like. I'm going to put one on the first trigger and one on the 5th trigger. The 5th trigger, though, doesn't happen every time, so I'm going to add a step component 4 right there. And this is what the drums sound like when they first come in. From here, we can go to the 4/8 pattern, and this is going to similarly be mostly the kick track, but there's also going to be hi-hat. Except because this is 4/8, we're going to change the step count to being 8. I'm going to change the engine, which I'll have to do every time because I made the mistake of not thinking about that beforehand. And I'm going to add in 2 kicks, or 2 triggers here for the kick track. I'm going to put one on the first step and one on the 7th step. This kick on the 7th step, though, is only going to happen the first 3 of every 4 times. I think it also happens on the 8th time, and I had some weird way of dealing with this in the previous project, but for simplicity's sake and the ease of following this, I'm just going to say this happens 3 of every 4 times. There's one more drum on this track. I'm going to open up the TE kicks. I'm going to open up the hi-hat track, and I'm going to load the TE perk plug, and I'm going to be using this sound. Now, if you listen closely, that doesn't quite sound right. Oh, it actually does. Whoops. But the point is that if you load it normally, it would sound like this. But I'm going to adjust this first parameter. I'm going to turn it counterclockwise to slow it down. But I'm actually not going to bother changing the step count on this. I'm actually just going to add a jump 8 right here because that's going to keep the sequencer or the playhead stuck here forever. And that's because this sound only happens at the very, very first beat of the pattern. And I'm just now going to be able to copy it to everywhere else that this happens without having to worry about adjusting the step count because it only happens that first time. So if I hit play, it ends up being stuck here, which is perfect for my purposes. I'm now going to copy the hi-hat track to patterns 4, 5, 6, and 7. I don't think it happens on 8, but, oh no, wait, it does happen on 8, I believe. So I'm going to hit Shift, Shift, and then Shift, and now the hi-hat track is blinking. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it to all of those spots. So now we have the hi-hat ready to go on all of our patterns. Okay, so let's move on to the 5/8 section. And for the kick track, I'm going to load up Z kicks, and then I'm going to put one on the first step, 3rd step, and then also a kick right here on the 7th step. I'm going to change the step count to being 10, and this is our kicks track right now. Let's add in the snares now, and the snares are going to happen, we're going to make sure that the step count is 10. I'm going to load up Z snares, and for this project, I'm going to use that kind of a half clap, half snare sound. I don't know, it doesn't sound exactly right, so hopefully you can find a better sound than I'm using. And then I am going to make this snare hit happen. I'm going to add a trigger spark 4 to make this happen every 4th time. So here's what we have for this 5/8 section. Okay, so that sounds close enough to me. So I'm ready to move on to this 6/8 section. So that's pattern 5 in the first project. So the 6/8 section is going to be a little bit more complicated, at least with the kick. So I'm going to change the step count to being 12, and I'm going to add 4 kicks. I've got to load the Z kicks again because I, again, made that mistake of not doing that in the last video. So I'm going to put 1 on step 1, a kick on step 1, a kick on step 4, then I'm going to put 1 on steps 6 and 7. But this kick on step 6 is only going to happen every 4th time. And we're going to move to the snare track now, load up Z snares, and then I'm going to change the step count, because we're again in 6/8, to being 12. And I'm going to use this snare, even though it doesn't quite, again, it doesn't sound quite right. And I'm going to place this snare on steps 5, and then also on step, what would this be? 9, 10, 11. Okay. So this is the snare that happens most of the time, but every 4th time, we're going to also hear this snare. So this is the pattern that we'll hear for our 5 or 6/8 section. So there's one other instrument here. I'm going to move over to the samples track, or the effects, I don't know, whatever you want to call this, the 4th track, and I'm going to load up TE effects. Now, I don't know why my notes say to use this sound, but I'll go with it. So I'm going to change this to also being 12 steps, and I'm going to add that sound right here. I'm going to add a step component that's going to be a multiply 3. And that's because there's this sort of like a higher pitched sound that happens at the end of, at the very end of each measure. So not perfect, but I'm just going to say that that's close enough, at least for right now. So that's our 6/8 section. Let's move on to our 7/8 section. And actually, the 7/8 section, believe it or not, is just the hi-hat at first second. The 8/8 section is next, and this is where the drums are going to come back in and be a little bit more involved again. But we're not going to change the step count. So we're going to have 16 step count, we're going to have step length of 1, and we're still going to be using Z kicks, Z snares, TE perks, and the TE effects. So we're going to put our kick on the following spots. We're going to put 1 on step 1, step 3, step 7, 9, and 11. And these are all going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to put a step component on the 1st step, 3rd step, 9th step, and 11th step. The step component that I'm going to put on the 1st and 9th step will be a trigger spark 1. On the 3rd and 11th step, I'm going to put a trigger spark 2. Let's move over to the snare track, which again is still going to have all 16 steps. And here we're going to put a snare, let's pick our sound, right here. And I just checked the previous project, and I made things a little bit more complicated than was probably necessary. But let's just do this verbatim. And I might not be able to explain this as articulately because this was trial and error from before. But what I did was I put a jump 1. So on this 8th step, I added a step component that was jump 1. And I added a component spark 888. So that means that it's going to jump back and play this the first 7 of every 8 times. And then on the 8th time, it's going to move ahead and play the rest of this. And then at this point, the snare actually drops out. So what I'm going to do to compensate is add a bunch of things that will kind of extend the length of these next 5 steps. So I couldn't tell you why I did it this way, but I'm just going to trust James from the past, which, pro tip, generally not a good idea to do that, but this time maybe we can make an exception. So I did a pulse hold 9 and a pulse count 2, I believe on all 3 of these. It might have just been the first 2. Let me quickly check. Oh, cool, and I accidentally erased it. Okay, so it is actually just the first 2. So on this one, I'm going to remove that pulse hold, and I'm going to add in another pulse hold 9, and then on this step, I'm going to add a pulse hold 6. I don't know why I thought this was the best way of accomplishing this, but you know, hopefully it does something for us. I don't know. Then I'll just add 3 more steps here. So the goal is that it plays this 8 times, then it's silent until the end of the 8th repeat of the entire pattern or the entire measure, at which point it's going to play these 3 snares leading into the next section, which is when we're going to get those triplets and stuff. And let's listen to it once for this pattern. Cool, so that's as close as I think I'm going to be able to get. So for this 8th pattern, we again have a kick and a snare part. Our kick is going, both of which are going to be, on this 8th pattern, we've got a kick and a snare part, both of which are going to take up all 16 steps. So let me change the engines to make sure that they're right. For this very first one, I'm going to put 4 kicks. I'm going to add one to the first step, 8th step, 9th step, and the 12th step. So I'm going to add a trigger spark to the 8th step, and it's going to have a value of 1. And then I'm going to add a trigger spark to the 12th step that's going to have a value of 2. Next up, I'm going to move to the snare track, and I'm going to put a snare. Let's make sure our volume is up. I'm going to put that snare onto the 5th step, and then also onto the 13th step. So this is just going to be like beats 2 and 4. So it's almost normal here. But I've got some step component trickery up my sleeve as well that I did before. So I added step components here and here. And what I did was I wanted to add that jump 8 right here because at a certain point, the snare drops out completely before we have that next section come up. Man, why don't we just change the sound of that real quick here? Just because, well... Nope. Okay, still not perfect, but I'll roll with it for now. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my snare track, and we have this jump 8, but I don't want that to happen every time. However, it's really tricky with jump 8. If you actually want it to hold the sequencer in one spot, you're going to have to not have a component spark on it. So I'm going to actually add a pulse hold 2 right here to compensate for the fact that I'm about to have this jump back to the first part. So I don't want to mess up the timing, but I do want it to go back to the beginning. And I'm going to add a component spark on top of that. And that's going to be 4, 4, and 4. So that means the first 3 times it plays through, it's going to play both of these. And then on the 4th time, it's just going to stop playing the snare anymore. So it plays through these actually 4 times, and then it's done. So let's listen to what that sounds like. So something sounds off, so I'm just going to move these a little bit earlier by holding the steps down and holding the minus key. So let's listen to this again. And when I say holding the minus key, I mean I just tapped it probably 4 or 5 times each. And that's going to make it a little bit earlier, which is going to give it a bit more of a triplet feeling. So those are the drums for this first project. I'm going to move to the second project now, and now we're going to do the 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, 8/4, or however you would like to count those. And for these, I'm going to make sure that I have my Z kick pulled up. I'm going to actually set the step length to being 2, and I'm going to make the step count 4. I believe this is going to accomplish what I think it will, or what I'm hoping for, but let me check it really quickly. So I'm going to put a kick on 1 and on 4. And I only want that kick on 4 to happen the first 3 of every 4 times. Cool, so that sounds close enough. On this snare track, I'm going to load up the right plug, increase the volume, and I'm going to put our snare over here. But that only happens on the fourth time that this is played. So I'm going to add a trigger spark 4 right here. So we've got. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and go back to that first project, and then I'm going to go to the third pattern, and I want to move to the hi-hat track. I'm going to copy the hi-hat track to the patterns in the second project by holding down project and hitting shift, shift, shift. Now the hi-hat track is blinking, but I can still change projects. I just recently learned this. So now I can place that on all of these projects, even though I'm like 99% sure it doesn't happen on all of them. So let's go ahead and listen to this first one here. Cool. So let's go ahead and now adjust the kick and the snare on both of these tracks. I'm just going to pull up the right engines. Hopefully you didn't, well, I guess you probably made the same mistake as me because, you know, if you followed this video. Whoops. Anyway, I'm going to go over here and I'm actually going to, again, set my step count to 2 on both of these. And now, instead of having it be 4, I'm going to change this to being 5. So now we have step length 2, step count 5 on both the kick and the snare tracks. For the kick track, we're going to have a kick on the first step and the fourth step. I'm going to go to the snare track here, and I'm going to add in a snare on the third and fifth steps, so 3 and 5. But the snare on step 5 is only played every second time, so it sounds like this. Nope, that's wrong, isn't it? Okay, you know, looking at the other project, I just made a big mistake on it, and I removed the step I was hoping to actually reference. So hopefully this sounds okay enough. This doesn't sound quite right to me. I wonder if it's actually supposed to be on the fourth time that happens. So I'm just going to see what that sounds like. Okay, yeah, that sounds a lot more reasonable to me. And then I'm going to go to this pattern here, the third pattern on the second project, which is going to be now in 6/4 time. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to the kick track, load up the plug, change the volume. I'm going to change the step count to being 2, and I'm going to change the step length to being 6. I'm going to put a kick on steps 1 and then 4. Cool, so that sounds about right, but now we just have to, you know, do the rest of it. At this point, I believe that the hi-hat actually no longer happens at the beginning of each of these measures. In fact, I don't think it happens on this second pattern, at least now that I'm referencing my previous cover projects. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that from all of these last ones, which is fine. And let's go back to our 6/4 section. Okay, so this is actually a bit of a retake here because I messed up this 6/4 pattern. So let me go ahead and go back to the kick track, and I'm going to change my step length to being 2, and my step count is going to actually just be 3. And then I'm going to pull up my kick. For the snare on this track, I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to make the step length 2. The step length 2, and the step count is going to be 6. I'm going to go ahead and put a snare on the third and sixth steps here. So the good news is that there's only drums on the 4/4, 5/4, and 6/4 part. There aren't on the 7/4 or 8/4 parts. But I recognize that this doesn't sound quite the same because it doesn't have the atmosphere. And the way you're going to have to accomplish that is by adjusting like reverb or distortion or delay on the effects tracks. And that's what's going to make the sound really, you know, actually sound like the original song or closer to it. You know, it's not going to sound the same. It's an OPZ project, right? But I'm just going to trust you to do that so that way this is not a like hour-long video because that would be quite the challenge to figure out and narrate at the same time. So at this point, I'm just going to say that we have like the very beginnings. We've got the rhythms figured out. We've gotten most of the triggers figured out, and they seem mostly true to the original studio recording. I'm sure that I missed some stuff, but hopefully this gives you a good start, and hopefully you learned a few things along the way. Okay, so actually something important just happened there. Sorry. What actually happened was that it took a second and it wasn't able to play that first kick track because on this pattern, I still have a different plug loaded, and sometimes that can be a glitch where it won't play that first note because it's still changing plugs. I'm going to take a bit of an extreme approach here, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and find the first pattern that has the snare and the hi-hat. So that's going to be pattern 4 on project 1. And I'm just going to copy all the track settings from this one by pressing Shift and Shift while I'm holding project. And then I just want to paste this everywhere. Okay, so when I just copied the pattern settings across all these patterns, I actually didn't take into account what happens with the ARP track. So I actually have to go back to this track right here, this pattern 8, because it's no longer going to have the ARP track off as it was before. We're now going to have the ARP track at 3. So I changed the ARP speed to being 3 to preserve this. Otherwise, it just sounds like this, which is a whole different song, right? Then I'm going to go ahead and move over to project 2. And here I'm going to change the ARP track to being, I think it's 4? No, it is not. It might be 2. That sounds more appropriate, right? So at this point, I'm then just going to copy the track settings from here, and I'm going to put it on those 3. On this 5th project, though, I believe it is going to be an ARP speed of 4. Boy, that does not sound like the original at all, does it? But hopefully it's the right notes. So with all of that being done, we can now do our playthrough. Geez, like this is why this song has taken so long, because it just, it's, you know, I'm intentionally doing the hardest song I possibly could, to partly to show off and partly just as, you know, like a challenge to myself. So here's our playthrough. was really hoping it would just actually end, you know, the spot I asked it to, but that's fine. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.